Appreciate you coming, and glad you could be here tonight. So my name's Rob. I organize Idea the IPO. We've been doing events in Silicon Valley for a number of years. We hold events multiple times a week from San Jose to San Francisco. We have a busy, busy calendar of events. I'd like to highlight just 2 events that are coming up. The current state of crowdfunding that's going to be in this room, Monday, the 27th of March. And further on down the line, Thursday, April 6th, we have a panel discussion, latest innovations in big data in Palo Alto. So check out all the details for all our events on our website, ideatheipo.com. We were launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no members, no events on our calendar. At this stage, we have over 50,000 members among all our meetup groups in the Bay Area. We've completed over 1,709 events. Not yet. We're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in Silicon Valley, bar none. Now it's okay. I'm not bragging, okay? I'm just stating a fact. All right. So if we're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is the global center of innovation and entrepreneurship, that would make us the most active, most prolific startup event organization in the entire world. Now, all right, well, that time I was bragging. Okay. Our mission is to promote entrepreneurship, support entrepreneurs, build community, and provide value in the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem. To that end, we provide content that is practical, actionable, and relevant, stuff that you can actually use to succeed as entrepreneurs. We believe in community because Silicon Valley is an aspirational ecosystem that attracts people from all over the world who come here to do great things. Who here is not originally from Silicon Valley? Who here was born and raised in Silicon Valley? Just you guys? Anyway. 3. Anyway, whether you're a native or you arrived last night, it's important for us to provide multiple channels for you to meet people, build relationships, and grow your network. In fact, we have a regular event every few weeks, a TGIF mixer, thank God it's Friday, at the Hyatt Regency Santa Clara. It's hosted by CJ Terrell, one of our team members. Let's hear it for CJ.
Hi everyone, I'm CJ. So as Rob mentioned, we have what we call TGF mixers. They're really cool ways to get to know the community just very casually. We have them at a place called the Hyatt Regency in Santa Clara. For those of you who don't know, it's by Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara, and also the Santa Clara Convention Center. Our next one is going to be on the 24th of this month, which is next Friday. We have them from 8 to 11 p.m. I do highly recommend coming out. I've been doing it for a little while myself, and we've seen people come from literally all over the world. Africa, South America, Australia, almost any part of Asia you could name. I've met people from almost every part, and people who come out do get that chance as well. They are free events, and so like I mentioned, next Friday is going to be our next one from 8 to 11 p.m., and I hope to see you there. Enjoy the event tonight.
With regard to value, it's important that we provide value at each and every one of our events. Not just value for your money, which is important because we know many entrepreneurs are struggling financially. So we make sure that we price our events so that they're affordable. If you cannot afford the cover charge, let me know. We're always looking for volunteers to help us out at our events, and volunteers can attend for free, within reason. For some reason, we have like 50 volunteers today. I don't know how that happened. But in addition, we want to make sure that we have a decent meal at each and every one of our events. Was this meal decent? Not really, huh? Well, look, I know you're expecting a 3-star Michelin meal, but this is not a gourmet food meetup. So deal with it and get used to it. Just kidding. More importantly, though, we want to provide value for your time, which is your most valuable resource. Now, we have a lot of partners that help us do what we do, law firms, venture capital firms, angel investor groups, incubators, accelerators, colleges, universities. Tonight, we're grateful to Datati Digital Marketing for hosting us at this beautiful venue. Let's hear it for Philip. Philip you want to come up and say a few words?
So I'm Philip Goldworth. I'm the CEO at Devote. Business partner, president is Roberta Kipeth over there. Our primary business is we're a digital marketing agency. We help both small and large companies with their digital marketing efforts. For the smaller to mid-sized companies, we offer a more comprehensive solution. We actually have a thing called the Big Program, which is and it's sort of an entire package to help people that need help in getting an entire marketing plan launched that includes both their digital presence and marketing automation help. For larger companies, we provide more tactical just backup resources. We're also involved in the content side of marketing, and we have a photography and video studio here, so we also produce that type of work as well. Thank you for coming out. We're glad to host, and we're really happy to have Rob here on a regular basis.
All right, we have a few other partners here tonight. I want to have them also come up and say a few words. Let's hear it for Long from Eptology.
Good evening. My name is Long. I'm the co-founder of a company called Eptology. We are a software company based here locally. We've been in business for about 5 years, done about 400. We have about 400 clients. I myself have been in the Bay Area for about 20 years and am local. What's different about us? Well, we can do some of the work, half the work, or all of the work. The other thing that's different about us is we can't do everything. We're one of the few shops that if we can't do it, we say we can't. But we do play in spaces like blockchain, e-commerce, mobile apps. So pretty much a lot of what you need, but not everything. The other thing that is different from us is we can actually help you with the sales or traction. That's one of the questions that you're going to have to answer if you expect to get funding. So we do the initial phase. Say if you need 100 clients or 10,000 clients, that's what we do. I have been doing marketing and sales for technology companies for about 20 years also. The last thing that we do for our partners is we actually help them find partners. Let's say you're the CTO and you need somebody that's really good at sales. Well, we can refer you to people and also help you find funding. Actually, you'll find that finding funding is easy if you can accomplish the first two. The problem is a lot of people don't want to do the first two or don't know how to do the first two, and they expect funding. I've never really seen anybody get funding without doing the first two. So again, the name is Long with Eptology. I'm more than happy to buy you a cup of coffee. I'd like to learn more about your venture and see if I can help. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Mike from CTO 911.
Hello, how are you? My name is Mike with CTO 911. Whoa. I offer consulting services for startups here in Silicon Valley. I help entrepreneurs who have a domain knowledge expertise in certain areas, but they need some partner on the technology side to help them execute the blueprint, come up with a strategy, the planning, the costing, if they need architectural requirements that they need to meet, or if you need to build a team, get some developers, I could help you with that. Lately, we've been involved in machine learning, data science projects. We have specialized in some, we'll work on some supply chain projects, real estate projects, educational technology projects. So if you have an idea and you need some help to execute your vision, I'll be glad to talk to you after the event. There's a business card also on the table, so I'll be glad to talk to you. Thanks.
So though our local mission is to help entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley, our greater mission is to democratize entrepreneurship and innovation all around the world. To that end, we have a robust YouTube channel, youtube.com/idea-to-IPO. We have tons of videos. We've documented most of our events, and this rich, valuable content is available on demand, anytime, anywhere, totally free of charge. That's whether you're in Sunnyvale, Menlo Park, Palo Alto, Maui, Moscow, or Timbuktu? Who's been to Maui? Nobody. Who's been to Moscow? 3, 4. Who's been to Timbuktu? Nobody. In any case, the point is, wherever you have access to Wi-Fi, you have access to the great content that we produce here in Silicon Valley. Our partner in this endeavor is Tim Jeggers of Jeggers Films. Let's hear it for Tim.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody. So I'm Tim. I do the video for a majority of the Idea to IPO events. I'm also an independent contractor. I've been doing stuff for probably about 10 years professionally. Got my start with weddings and kind of branched out into informational pieces and all kinds of stuff. Other than that, I'm interested in photography, and yeah, I'm here in the Bay Area. I would just like to make a request real quick while I'm up here that everyone please hold their questions until the end of the talk tonight. We'll have a microphone set up in the middle, and then you can line up and ask your questions then, which will be about 8 o'clock. We'll open the floor up for that. And yeah, other than that, we appreciate you coming and for the cooperation. And I'm going to go ahead and give it back to Rob. Thank you.
Okay, without further ado, I want to introduce tonight's featured speaker. He is one of the top corporate and startup attorneys in all of Silicon Valley. He's a partner at K&L Gates, one of the top law firms in the entire country. He is passionate about helping startups succeed, and he is a dynamic, charismatic speaker. Right? Without further ado, let's hit it for Stan Lewandowski.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to Rob and Idea to IPO and to Detati for hosting us tonight. I have seen some of the faces in the audience before, so I'm very pleased that you are sharing this evening with us. So thank you so much for coming. Tonight, we'll be talking about how to position your company for an investment by VCs, get that investment, and at the end, say that you won the battle. So that's the topic for tonight's event. As you've probably seen this before, this meeting is to educate you, provide some information about how certain matters are addressed, how to deal with certain circumstances, but this is not legal advice. So I have to have this slide up there telling you that this meeting will not create any attorney-client relationship today, and when the time comes, you will probably seek qualified legal counsel to help you with your legal affairs. K&L Gates. We have over 40 offices, as you can see, on 5 continents, and that means that we provide our clients with very comprehensive legal services from, in most cases, almost every place on earth where the legal services are needed. We are one of those firms that has full integration. So all the offices are fully integrated, and we work as one organism, whether you are working with someone in Perth, Australia, or Berlin, or San Francisco. We are part of the same entity and can help you with issues immediately rather than seeking somebody who is able to help, but we need to spend a few days to qualify that person. A few words about myself. I've been with K&L since 2007, so it's been a while. I've practiced as what I call emerging growth company lawyer or startup lawyer in Palo Alto. Most of my time, there are days, sometimes many during a week, that I go to San Francisco and practice out of that office depending on the client's needs. What I do daily can be quickly summarized as provision of legal advice to startup companies, those that are relatively new and those that have evolved from small startups and now they are undergoing probably the best transaction that founders hope for, meaning the acquisition by another company. During today's presentation, I want to cover 5 topics. You probably read in the announcement, and now this is all that's going to be part of this discussion. So everybody knows that we divide life of a startup into certain phases. And all of that will help us to discuss other items that will lead us to the final portion when we talk about mistakes and best practices. There's nobody who has a startup who comes and says, I have a startup that just got funded yesterday. You start with an idea. You have to solve a problem. That's what most people say. I tend to say that you are not really solving a problem initially. I tend to look at my clients as people who view something as a great opportunity. They say, whether this solves really a problem or not, there is an opportunity. And then there is a divagation of what that really is. So you have an idea, you have some sketches, you have things that you discuss with your colleagues, and then someone slowly says, this makes sense, this is needed, and you progress with this based on the information that you have. Once that's done, you may need to provide something to somebody else that proves what you believe is true. So in some cases, you go to a lab, work on a prototype, spend a few months, and finally you end up with a prototype that now has to be tested. Whether you finance this yourself or with somebody's help, you go to a place where someone says, I like what I see, I can provide some financing for you. So you've now got to a place where you can prove your concept. And I always tell people, look at this MVP more than MVP. And when you read Guy Kawasaki's book, the last one that I read was The Art of a Startup 2.0. He says that whatever you are working on, just like Rob said at the beginning, has to provide value. So this is minimum viable, valuable product. Once you have that, then you progress to the next stage when you build your company, and that step always requires money. Whether it's the money that you get from your colleague who is extremely wealthy and believes in what you are doing, or you go to a broader market and seek financing that way. That's up to you. You have to evaluate your chances of getting capital that you need based on the circumstances of a specific startup. Now, scaling is relatively easier. The most important thing has already been done. Building, getting capital for that. Scaling is just an extension of the initial buildup. In maturity and exit, that's the most fascinating time, 2, 3, sometimes 7, 8 weeks of hard work when you really get to a point where 3, 4, 5 years of hard work are now paying off, and you can join your new company for a year or two, enjoy some exceptionally great months before you move and build your next startup. Before I move to focus my presentation on the things that you really have to know about the financing ecosystem, I want you to have some background information, because you need to really know, before you go to anybody and look for money, where you really are. It's a big mistake to go to a VC and say, I've heard that you are funding companies, because maybe that VC is your neighbor, and you were not educated enough, and you ask for $400,000. And your colleague tells you that he is really willing to do that, but later when the time comes. And I divide this financing ecosystem into 5 categories. The one that we were talking about before, when you really have the incubation stage. In some cases, you may need $70,000, in some $180,000. My kind of median is when I talk to people, they say, oh, we can do this for $150,000. So I just call it my median. Pre-seed is a little bit later, when you really work on the prototype, need to get some traction going, need to hire someone. you're still validating. In my cases, I say up to 500,000 should be enough. Then is this seed stage that 10 years ago, not too many people really put that into a separate category. Now, things that I call between 1 and 3 million, this is kind of a nice seed round. Someone does 2.5 million, nice seed round. Series A, in my life, 3 to 10, and you will meet people who say, I closed Series A, and it was 15. It happens. Then at the end of the day, people will focus more on the median rather than the situations that are on both sides of the equation. And Series B, over 10, it really depends. Sometimes it can be 12 or 15. Just one thing, I think Tim mentioned that we'll try to end at about 8:05, and then we'll have questions at the end. People will come up, state the question. I will answer the question for the benefit of the people who will be watching this a little bit later, so there is clarity, and we kind of go through the material. Some facts about what has happened since 2014. We see huge numbers. That you look at 2016, we had over 8,000 transactions that closed, which in the aggregate brought about 70 billion in deal value, which when you look at this nice depiction of the things, you will see that 2015 was slightly better than 16, but then all the prior years were a little bit worse. So it's still a very high year in the deal volume and the capital raised by companies in the US, but as you know, Silicon Valley is definitely leading this pack of companies raising capital. Just for some of you, this might be new. Some of these firms are very well known to you. Some are less known. There are some extremely popular names, regardless of whether you're in Australia, Kathmandu, or New Delhi. Everybody knows who the first and second player or the last player on this right list is. It's very easy to read mostly successful stories about these companies. Now, so many people say that the Valley is a place where there's so much money. Do you think that's true? I will just answer this for you. There is a lot of money in the Valley. And there will continue to be a lot of money. This is a very specific region. The smartest people from all over the world come to the Valley, build the companies, whether with the technology that's partially owned by universities or partially owned by some other players, or they own technology that's developed by 2, 3, 4 founders. And I don't really see any, in the near future, any distraction from this being the magnet for the top talent to come, build companies, be successful, and innovate, and really provide all of us with better technology, better way of living, and that will benefit the whole humanity. Before you get there, before you can see that someone has an interest in you, there's a lot of prep work that has to be done. And I tend to tell my people with whom I work from day one, do things right from day one. When the time comes for you to talk about money, it will be just an extension of the whole journey rather than paralysis and scare and running against the clock because someone now is expecting things to be available to them and you can't really provide them. So when you get the term sheet, that will be a fascinating event. Someone is validating that what you told them is now really real. Not too many people just will walk into a room and end up with a term sheet, but there are companies that get to that point, and sometimes within a week they have 5 or 6 term sheets, and we'll talk more about this. Everybody will tell you that you need to have a lawyer, and that's true. But when you are building this startup, as the founder or COO, you have to be the leader from day one. This is your job. This is something that will be on your shoulders, and others will be just your assistants. You will be the one going forward with a vision, and others will be helping. Sometimes people just misunderstand this and simply say, others will do this for me. No. There are some roles that others should not be playing. I go to many events where companies are pitching, and the CEO is sitting on a chair where the marketing person is showing up and talking about the company, claiming that this is the founder who is sitting somewhere. That's not the way things are. This is the leader. He or she needs to be in front, talking about the company he or she is building, not outsource this job to somebody else. This just proves to people that this is not the most knowledgeable person about the company. If she or he doesn't know the details about some deep technology issue that has to be addressed, the CTO can jump for a minute, address it, but the driver is in the CEO's or CEO's shoes. Sometimes companies choose not to have the CEO, they just have a founder and COO, because for different reasons that nomenclature is needed. The whole point of you coming to this presentation is that you are probably thinking about building companies, or you are already building companies. And if a day comes where you will be talking about a term sheet, financing, what you are doing today is getting prepared for that day. So when you do get this invitation, you go and are knowledgeable. You show to the other side that you are a real player. And you are gaining this knowledge over time, and you will see how this really will help you, not just with the capital raising, but with other things related to you being a credible person in a negotiation. So some of the things that I want to quickly address, let's assume that you have a company that's been in existence for 6 months. And the goal after this presentation is for you to say, yes, we are in the process of raising now $3.5 million. You will go home and say, now I know what I need to do, because I still have a few months to do some homework and get ready for that negotiation. So today will help you with that. The 3 items that you see on this board, knowing your stockholders, knowing about your IP situation, and being able to justify your financial projections, and I will tell you why this is important just on the recent experiences that I have. Now, stockholders, if you form a company, you've already formed it, there's 4 of you. You have to be in a position at any time after the term sheet is signed, and we'll talk more about the term sheet, to open your kimono, be it data room or physical file, if there are some people still playing with those kind of documents. But these days, there are many companies that provide you with the service. You simply provide access to your data room, and that person can have the associates go in, read all the documents, and they have to support what you are saying. If you are saying we have 4 founders, everything is tip-top, then when they go through those records, they cannot find a flaw. That's just your credibility. You understand what you are doing. Now, if you are selling yourself as someone who has very strong IP position because you have 5 patents filed, of course, people will quickly correct you that now we are talking about patent applications that were just filed a few weeks ago. There's 5 of them, but they are provisionals. There are some obligations that you have now to file non-provisional ones, and then the discussion will start about where are you going to be with your technology on a worldwide basis, what you have to do in those countries, et cetera, whether you have documentation assigning the IP from the founders to the company, et cetera. Many people just take those things for granted and say, no, I'm ready because I signed a piece of paper that I found, and now the IP is in the company's hands, and the patents are great because I read certain book, and now I know that these patent applications are good. Probably they are not. Sometimes I have clients who come to me at the stage where they do things themselves, and go to VCs right after we meet. We meet for an hour, and they say, with our company that's been built by the three of us, we are now at 65,000 MMR. Help us with getting a good intro to a good VC that invests in SaaS companies. And that's a very compelling story. That's already a good progression. I tend to be more satisfied when they come and say, I have 80 to 100. That's kind of almost a green light to go to a very good VC and get a nice syndication and get 5 or 6 million very, very quickly. But again, people need to be able to justify what they put into their performance. They have to understand what specific VCs want. Again, this justification cannot be out of air, out of nowhere. And people sometimes will talk about the pre-money valuation in that respect. People are throwing numbers they can't justify because they heard somewhere. And they can't really have the benchmark data that's really needed to have a decent conversation. I want everybody to understand what LOI, MOU, term sheet really is. And if you email me after this presentation, within 24 hours, you will receive slides. If you don't, but you still want them, then team will upload them on Idea to IPO's website so you can get them. You don't have to worry about not having access to this information. Now, whether it's called MOU, LOI, doesn't really matter. What's most important is that this is a document that really provides a blueprint for you for the future transaction. And some people say, don't worry, not too much has to be addressed in that document. I say, if you don't understand what this document is, then you are already making a big mistake. If you are walking to a transaction by yourself, even if you had 3, 4, 5 term sheets in the past under your belt, fully negotiated, and you understand what it is, and you think that you can do this, again, think again. At this stage, and I will say more later, you have to have someone who is a qualified, experienced counsel for this kind of discussion. Because once things are in this document will be signed and used against you when the definitive agreements are negotiated because you agreed to it. Oh no, it just said standard terms. This is what it means. Oh, I didn't know. Sorry, you lost. Again, there are some things that it's worth spending another day negotiating and putting into this document, and then your life will be shortened by 2-3 days at the negotiation of the big packet of documents because you took care of something when people really want to move forward. Maybe there is a competing term sheet. You say, we need to really get this done today. Sorry. If we don't, then we just move on with somebody else. As you probably noticed, whatever I'm talking about tonight, at the end of the day, is supposed to serve for you as a bag of knowledge that you can use later and structure your company progression in a way that you will be successful, that you will say, I close a deal, and I know I won, rather than I close a deal, but I have no idea whether I'm now able to say I won or not. That's a very difficult situation. That means that what I'm talking today about, let's say, point number 2, will not be valid a year from now. Again, some things have common trends. Some change pretty dramatically. So when you have a company and you got some seed funding, let's say you are looking at just minimum 80, 100,000 that you got from your family members, you may want to look at bridge loans because you know that in about 6-7 months, you will be raising your Series A, your $3.5, $4, $5 million, maybe even more, depending on what happens. Then what in our industry we say, you have to have a bridge to that point in time when you can really close significant financing. Now, what are those bridge loans? They come in the form mostly of a convertible note. That's not rocket science. Most of you already know this. What I noticed last year, 2016, most of those things for transactions that preceded Series A, they were about $300,000 to $400,000 at the median level. Again, there were some with 200, there were some with 800. Again, median is a different thing. Cost of capital. How much are you paying for what you are getting? In most cases, we look at three things. For notes, how much do I have to pay in interest? I can tell you that the last few years, people have been talking about, is your note going to be 8% or less? I can tell you that the majority of my transactions last year were between 5 and 6%. Some were 2, some were 3, some were 8. But 5, 6 is definitely the number you want to have, nothing more. It will change. Fed just decided to do something yesterday with 25 basis points up. Maybe in the next 2 years, 200 basis points will be used to raise the floor. That will then cause also the interest go up, and maybe we'll see 8% as standard in 2018 already. And I think that's something that's going to happen. Two features that I usually talk about that 80% of those transactions require, investors will say, I want a price cap and I want a discount. Again, few things to remember if someone is presenting you with that set of documents. In most cases, the price cap for pre-Series A should be about 5, 6 million, and that's a reasonable number. Again, it's median that I call it. Discount on conversion should not be these days more than 20%. If someone is telling you it's 40% because whatever, don't listen, just say, hey, you don't even know what you're talking about. I need to find other investor, or you get educated and you really give me terms that make sense. So since we are talking about VCs and how to win with VCs, we are not going to talk about instruments that give you $200,000. We are going to talk about items that bring 3, 4, 5, 7, $10 million into your company. The higher we go, of course, the higher valuations we play with, the higher investment runs, et cetera, et cetera. Now, most companies, whether they are in the Valley, Boston, Massachusetts, North Carolina, doesn't really matter. Most of them will be Delaware companies anyway, will have one class of stock built into the original certificate of incorporation or articles. I just call it a charter document. It's a uniform term used for all those situations. When we are talking about an investment by our big investors who will bring several $1 million, we have to talk about preferred stock. And you probably know, over the last few years, we've been dealing with things such as Series C preferred stock, SAFE preferred stock, standard preferred stock, A1, A2, whatever the denomination is, AA, BS, and a few other things. The nomenclature doesn't really matter. You can call your stock however you want. There is no law that says certain name has to be used. But having stock gives you an equity position in the company. Now, preferred stock will come with what we call superior rights, preferences, privileges that common stock doesn't have. That's the stock that the founders have. And one good feature for preferred stock that will come into play when I ask you a few questions about liquidation, how companies are sold and what happens then, at any time you can convert your preferred stock to common stock. There has to be a good reason. If you are an investor, that discussion happens at the liquidity stage when you evaluate, model your transactions. It will be better off having our 20% in common rather than just preferred. Most VC deals that you will see or be part of will have the following documents as the standard set. And I will tell you right from the beginning, if there is someone in the room who believes that in a month or two, you will be dealing with a term sheet and Series C or Series A transaction, and you've never done it, then you should go home tonight Go to that magic website, nvca.org. Download all those documents. They are annotated. They provide a guide for you to understand what those provisions mean, what's good, what's bad for the company. These documents are drafted with the investor being the center of attention. But the notes will tell you, or the annotations will tell you, what really is good for the company, what the consensus positions are, what's good, what's bad, what you should be asking for, what the trend is. Again, these are documents from 2013. Many, many things have changed since then, and we see a big shift in the negotiation when I work with someone from Massachusetts who doesn't have too much exposure to how we do things in Silicon Valley. The arguments that flow come from those documents. So we say we don't do those things this way in Silicon Valley, and we tell them how we do it. But no, this was 3-4 years ago. Let's not talk about it. Things have changed. You just have to follow what's happening. One of the biggest discussions, and this is where the investors will really like you if you come prepared. But again, come prepared doesn't mean finding the information online, because there is not too much available online beyond what you read from different publications about the deals that were announced. Most of the secret sauce is hidden under material that's subject to subscription payments. You have to pay in order to access that. And again, I will tell you from experience, the best source of data on deals, pre-money valuations, will come from VC firms and law firms and accounting firms. These three sources are the best ones because we have databases where we track down by industry what has happened in the last quarter, what has happened in the last 12 months. That allows us to say, yeah, based on these 15 transactions, this is kind of the median deal, or this is where you should be positioning yourself. If you just come and say, I've heard from my buddy who has an AI startup, they got this valuation, but then you talk about 15 other things and say, you are completely different. It's AI, but you are definitely in a different bucket. Don't demand 17 pre for Series A when we see that you are probably at 12 and a half, 13. And when you really get to not just showing 10, 15, 20, you really show to the other side that, okay, you've done your homework and somehow you have access to good information that's now credible. So pre-money valuation, that's the first item that investors will ask you and say, how much is your company worth, either pre or post? I don't have to explain to this group of people what those two things really are. I will just say post-money valuation is whatever you agreed to have your company valued at prior to the investment, and then add what has been invested, and that's your post. The post will be the number you will be using later when you do subsequent rounds, and you'll be now telling people that you are either doing up round or down round. If you are after your 5 million Series A investment and 20 million post-valuation, you are now selling shares at 19 pre. Everybody knows that we are talking about a down round, right? If we are going up, then it would be up round. Many people say, hey Stan, we like working with you, we just heard about you, etc., etc. Do something for us that's standard Silicon Valley startup. And that means we have to put capitalization for your company in certain form and fashion that doesn't shock anybody. If I have a founder who already formed a company using some interesting sources that are not the best ones, there are many good ones, but let's say it's something that the founder found somewhere and now has a company. In many cases, I see that there's 3 founders and each of them will have 1,000 shares. That simply means that we have to really deal with stock splits as part of the next transaction and increase those numbers, and 1,000 shares will become 1 million, for example, or 2 million, depending how we play with the cap. I tend to have 10 million shares of common stock That's authorized in this charter, allowing me to issue all of that or reserve for issuance to others. So if I have, let's just say, 2 founders, in my standard startup, I would have 4 million shares going to both of them, whether it's 3 million, 1 million, 2, doesn't really matter. I talked before about the equity split among the founders. It's not 50% most of the time. And then I put 1 million into a bucket that's for advisors, consultants, other people who will be getting options to buy equity securities when they earn the right to do so, and that right will come when they really provide services to my company, whether it be developers or somebody else. At that time, I tend not to have any authorization for preferred stock. That's something that comes later. Sometimes I see documents that say you have 10 million common, 20, or 20 million common, 10 preferred. At this stage, it's not really necessary to muddle the water because we will deal with those things later when the investors come. So when you look at this structure very quickly, you will see that we have 4 million already issued, 1 million sitting in a bucket. That means 80% is in the founders' hands on a fully diluted basis, meaning we take into account the pool as the denominator and assume that all these shares will be issued, and they have also 100% on the outstanding basis, meaning only the shares that have already been issued and paid for. So when you start talking to your VCs, they will say, okay, once we agree on the pre-money valuation, it's going to be extremely easy to get down to the price per share. And that will then lead to how many shares an investor or investors will get. So let's assume that we have kind of a standard company, but it's very good Series seed company at this level. Let's just look at Series A. I will just switch this for the benefit of you. So 8 million for a very strong Series seed preferred stock company. If we were going these days with a very good Series A, most of my clients would probably look at a little bit more than 8. They will be somewhere on the median side between 10 and 12. Some are better, some are worse, but that would be where we are operating with. The pre-money valuation has been pretty high in the last 2 years. So let's say we have, in this case, 8 million pre. Stock pool is 1 million, investment 3, fully diluted shares is 5, because we talked about this before. So 2 items that you need to have. On the nominator side, you take the pre-money valuation. On the denominator, you have the fully diluted cap. In this case, 4 plus 1 is 5, 8 by 5 gives you 160 per share. And you know that the investment is 3 million, so it's very easy to calculate how many shares people will be getting. In this scenario, I want you to pay attention to one item, which is what we call equity incentive plan or compensation plan or stock plan. Whatever you call it, you can just put a general term option pool. Take a look. We all know founders have 4 million common stock allocated to both of them. Let's just assume it's 2 of them. Option pool, in the first case, we have 1 million, just like in the prior slide. And the price per share will be 1.6. In the second scenario, you decided with your founder that you will have 500,000 shares reserved for the issuance to employees and other people. So at the end of the day, when this $3 million investment comes in, it will result in the same equity ownership for the investor. It will be 27.3%. And take a look what happens with the founders. The founders have 58 and 64. Let's just say it's about 6%, not a big deal. But at this stage, 6% is a lot. If your investors agree to close this deal with 8% in the option pool being there on the post-closing basis, this will be a good deal, because what happens later, every single reservation of shares under the pool umbrella will cause dilution to everybody, not just to the initial team. So most investors will try to put the first situation where they will say, whatever pool you have now, when we close, we'll just look at the pro forma cap table on post-closing basis, and we want you to use your lawyer or somebody else and model this, so we end up with 12, 15% on the post-closing basis as part of the total fully diluted capitalization. This is a very good illustration to think about how this financial engineering really works, because so many people I have, they will just say, what's the difference, 1 million or 500,000? It's only 500,000. Until they see this, they don't really follow, because it's intangible, it's so distant. But once people see numbers, 6% matters, especially when you are selling a company for 100 million later, and you say, I ended up, this is 6%, but let's say the founders ended up with just 0.5% more at the M&A stage, just 0.5%. This matters. You can really go and enjoy with this additional money. Just a tiny quiz. I'm not requiring anybody to say that this is relatively easy. So if I have, and this is based on the data, for 2016, the seed and Series A combined, the median investment amount was between $3 and $4 million with the valuation that's about $12, $13 million. Now, if 3 is being invested by an investor on a pre that's 12, you probably see very quickly that the post-money valuation, who wants to say, will be 15. So the question is, and we'll just do the first one, if someone says, okay, please tell me what percentage of the company will be in the hands of the investor post this transaction, who can say the magic number? Absolutely, 1/5, 0.2, and this is how this deal is going to be done. And this is pretty standard. If you run your calculations and it will lead you to believe that now 47% is going to the investor, you don't sign this term sheet. Now, this is where the real story starts, and this is what you really have to understand. There are 5, 6 crucial provisions in the charter, and they mostly are in the charter, that will decide your fate at the M&A stage. You have to assume that even though you are doing simple 3 million Series seed financing, you have to assume that this is the last financing this company will ever do. And when that happens, the charter will lead everybody to split the pie. And you may just say, we are so early, this is the 10th month of our existence, we'll have B and C and D, and probably then somebody will buy us, and suddenly you get this offer that you can't refuse, say, oh, wow, and now we have a problem. So let's walk through this. So when investors get preferred stock in your company, that stock, as I said before, comes with preferential treatment. And that will be other features that common will not have. The main thing that people are asking for is the seniority in liquidation. And liquidation can be just a normal dissolution. The company decided to sell its assets and distribute the profits and basically close the doors. In every charter, you will see a provision that says a sale of the company, a majority or substantially all of its assets, a merger, et cetera, is called a deemed liquidation event. And in that case, you all follow the waterfall for the distribution of assets. So what do investors really get these days? And let's say this is a $5 million deal. You have one lead investor bringing 4, another 1. Now, assuming there is a liquidity event, what do they get? And we'll talk more about a specific example, but the main question is, when you sit at this table and people are saying, if you are really sitting, because in most cases there will be a call or people will just hear your presentation, say, good, we'll follow up, and then they send you a draft. And that's where you run to a lawyer if you don't have one. The standard in the Valley is that you get, as an investor, 1x of what you put in, plus all the dividends that were declared but unpaid. And then the story begins. What else do you get? That's standard. Now, you have different features that follow. Will I, after getting my 1x, participate in future distribution of other assets? And by assets, we mean funds and other more tangible assets. Because sometimes you will see in documents, assets or funds. Cash is assets, right? On the balance sheet is the first thing, current assets, cash. So if you are not participating, which is about 80% of the transactions out of 100, 80 out of 100 will have no participation. You get your initial investment, dividends, if there were any, and you're out. So this is where this modeling comes in, where the investors have the right to convert their stock into common and say, if I do this, will I be better off or not? Participating, now you have to decide, are you fully participating or just partially? There are some deals, about 10%, where somehow there is full participation. Very unusual, but sometimes companies agree to it. Some of it, I believe, is lack of knowledge. They simply don't really understand what that means. It's just a complicated document. Someone tells them that this is how things are. They say, fine. Okay, we understand. And lawyers are not equal. One lawyer is not the same as the other one. The same applies to an accountant and everybody else. You go to a developer, and one will do an excellent job, another one will just require 15 iterations of what was done before. Now, the last sentence that we can convert preferred to common is no-brainer. Everybody knows this. You just need to know when to use this weapon because it will have financial repercussions. So let's just run an example very quickly. I have my own startup, and someone put a term sheet for 40 million. Great. This is where most people, usually starts with the founders, go to the charter, and now for the first time ever, they really read this document very, very carefully. Now they know that they will be paid. They don't know what. They need to find out. I tend to tell my guys, take the weekend off, read this document, call me anytime. You understand this, you will be happy 2 years later because you will just call me and say, yes, this is what we get, rather than, hey, so what are we going to get? What you agreed to 2 years ago. So, investor put $4 million in Series A and owns 20% of equity, and the founders at this stage own 80%, founders and other people who got common. Now, what does an investor get in this situation? The question is a complicated one because you don't know too many other factors, right? You need to really know what was in the charter, whether the investor participates or doesn't. If it doesn't, whether there was a cap and all those other things. So those questions are tricky and require some additional knowledge. So let's just, before I go to that one, let's just run a scenario that, and if someone wants to stand up and tell us the story, please feel free. But the scenario will be that there will be 1x, no participation, and under those circumstances, I will just tell you how it is. 40 million, we chop the first 4 that goes to the investor. We have left 36. The investor negotiated a poor deal. It's simply the end of the rope. So the 36 will go to common, and they now get the remainder. Since the investor has 20%, what would that investor do as the last resort to save the face? Convert to common. If that happens, 0.2 times 40 is no longer 4. At least something happened, so you simply gave yourself double deal. You take 8 rather than only 4. If the investor didn't do that at that stage, I think no one would ever put a cent into that fund again. But that's how things are, and they would always do that. They would be smart enough. If they missed in the first instance the treatment, that they should at least participate to some extent. But most transactions will really lead the investors to get more. If there is good liquidity event, they always get more than 1x. If the transaction turns out badly, then sometimes they get 0 and just pain. Dividends is the next item that 7-8 years ago was extremely popular to have, let's say, more complicated dividends. Today, if you see a charter that says that someone has cumulative dividends, that would be a shocker. Even though they happen, very, very rarely, I would say 1 out of 10 deals may have them, but I would say it's still very unusual. So what that means, we have non-cumulative dividends. When the board decides that dividends should be declared and paid to people who are stockholders, then this happens. But as you can imagine, startups have other good uses for funds rather than paying investors. And cumulative, years ago, they would just aggregate, let's say, 8% of the investment amount per share would just accrue every year. So let's say you put $1, so nicely 8 cents would accrue on annual basis. And after 5 years, you would have this 40 cents that would be paid in addition to your 1x as part of the liquidation procedure. Anti-dilution. I get many founders who say, okay, we need to have anti-dilution protection for us, so we stay at the same level and we just keep selling shares and we stay at 20% each. I say, wow, that's dreamland, but people really have to follow what that means. So in our case, when we talk about investors demanding anti-dilution protection, they are talking about situations where the next issuance of shares after the investment will lead the company or the issuer to sell shares at a price that's lower than the one in the prior financing. When that happens, the conversion rate that people started with, meaning 1 share of preferred converts into 1 common, now has to be changed because this future issuance causes some negative consequences of the prior investors' holding. So there are several different scenarios that people use, and I will tell you the most commonly used is the weighted average of the broad-based nature that leads the company to issue upon conversion the fewer shares than by using the narrow-based model or the ratchet. Ratchet is simple statement that if the company sells shares at a price that's X, the prior investor gets conversion at that new price. No questions asked, easy calculation. 80 cents now means 80 cents. When the prior shares were at $1, easy. With the broad-based and narrow-based, this is technical. There are formulas built into the documents, and there is no reason for me to talk more. I just want you to understand that anti-dilution comes in different forms, and the substance really has to be digested slowly because the formulas change, the definitions change, and that's how it is. Board of directors, very quickly you will know that companies have as an obligation, mandatory requirement to have a board, and most my clients who are starting as Delaware companies will start with a 3-board structure. Some, when they are sole founders, will have 1, and that's definitely fine. When the investment comes, you are talking about an aggregation of different people. Protective provisions, this is a set of things that are required for the investor to approve. And you've seen some of those provisions somewhere else. right of first offer. This is what happens when the investors have the right to buy a portion of the future issuance, and we call them major investors because not everybody has that right. Right of first refusal, what happens when you want to sell your common stock, then the company gets the right of first refusal, meaning it can buy your shares, or then the right goes to the investors, with some exceptions where you transfer to your family members, for example. Drag-along right is a right where you will simply take the investors and drag them through a sale process because you have that authorization in the voting agreement. They signed this before, and the deal goes forward. Redemption, very early done, very rarely done. That means that the company would be required to buy shares back if the investors ask. Other thing that you see, some management rights for certain funds that you can read when you see this and ask questions later. Common mistakes. These are the last two slides. I tell my folks one thing: be prepared, and by being prepared, you are on the way to win the battle. That means when someone says, I need to see your records on Monday and it's Saturday, you have to be able to do that, not go to a storage room and find the box with documents, but open the data room immediately. Insufficient IP, if there are issues with the assignment of technology rights from founders to the company, or some people have left the company, you didn't document that with proper releases in place, all of that will stall transactions, sometimes even derail it. And best practices, this is where you really win. When you build the company from day one that's clean, ready for investment, and strong, you will go to the market and end up after 2-3 weeks of good negotiations with different people, with several term sheets. What does that mean to you? That you will now pick and choose and say, I can accept this, but you will have to give me these two provisions because you know this one is giving you. You trade horses now, not with one investor, but with several. You end up with a completely different deal, and that's what really you have to try to achieve. Look for long-term relationship and people who are actively helping you rather than I have a fund that has no experience, no connections, I will just give you money. You just got money, but you are still without hands. You really have to have hands that will help you to go somewhere else. Now, the reason for me to spend more time on certain more important things was just to give you an idea what's important, why it's important, so you can say, I don't agree with you because you are saying that this is good. No, this is not good for my company because once you start showing pros and cons and you understanding them, you are a better player. And last but not least, when you get the term sheet, this is the last moment that you have to have a good lawyer on your team. If you don't, you will lose. And you need to be prepared before you get there, but when this term sheet lands in your lap, you have to really be having a good discussion and understanding what you are doing. So thanks so much again for your time, attention, and if there are any questions, please, the mic is yours.
So if you have a question, line up in front of the mic stand. We want to take as many questions as possible, so kind of be brief to the point, and we'll probably try and go for about half an hour active Q&A. So line up.
Thanks, Dan. One of the slides you had on the pitch book showing the data of the VC funding. Is there a split further on how much on the seed funding versus the later stage?
Yes, absolutely. If you have access to that, or if you call me, I cannot send you the report itself, but I can tell you exactly what the numbers are, and I can share that information over the phone. Yes,
So
please.
can you talk about the provision to sell the company? Who gets to decide depending on the stage of the company? And who has the last say on that?
It's always the board. This is the group of people who has been chosen by the investors, and sometimes it's 3 or 5, but that's now one group of people. The second one is always stockholders. And now the question is, which stockholders will have that right? Depending on the state, if nothing is really done, you just have a standard charter. Delaware will say, if you don't have any protective provisions giving people specific rights, it will say a majority of all the stockholders will decide, and that's fine. California will say, just by law, majority of common majority of preferred, so it's a different thing, right? Already one reason to go to Delaware if you are an investor, right? But on top of that, in Delaware, investors will add specific provisions for themselves as a group of people who will say, we as Series A will have to say yes to this deal, otherwise it doesn't go forward, regardless that we only have 6% in the company. So that's one thing. Board and stockholders, and there is nobody else. It's a matter of how many different groups of stockholders will have that specific right, because that's one right, and then another one that kind of goes together with what you said about the drag-along right, which means, do we give certain people specific right to approve the deal? So there is no other answer than board and stockholders. The only question remaining, which stockholders have that right to decide? If you gave them the proxy at the stockholder level, then they would decide for you, but smart founders will put a provision that will say, at least in the drag-along clause, that at least people who have common stock and are then currently providing services as employees or consultants to the company, they will have a separate vote to approve the deal. If they do it, if the investor does it, and the board, in most cases, this is the trio that does it, and then everybody else, by signing the voting agreement, gives proxy, and that allows this investor or founder or whoever else who is not voting in this transaction to be dragged and part of the sale. If they don't sign because they are now just objecting to the transaction, they've already given the company the proxy, and the company just puts their signature on the paper, so the deal is done. Please.
Thanks, Dan. I've got 3 questions for you. You have given very good explanation to the qualifiers for pre-seed or incubation stage, such as an idea or some traction, maybe some prototype effort going on. What are the qualifiers for a seed or a Series A? That's my first question. And you have given a good explanation about when you're doing a convertible note round, how does the interest and the discounts go? Can you explain about the caps and how we should configure the caps? And the third question would be, when we're going through a closing a round, say, for example, a seed round or a Series A, does the lead investor always necessarily need to be the largest contributor to the round? Or can a smaller contributor be the lead investor just because they're jumping in first or they are more experienced?
Let me start from the last one, because that will be the easier one.
Thank you.
Yeah, if someone is leading the round, the assumption is that they invest the majority of the round, and they dictate the terms. In many of my transactions, I have one investor that negotiates the term sheet. Someone else just piggybacks and says, yeah, fine, we put 500 out of the 5 million. You put 4, we put 500, and now the company will have the right to go and for 60 days close another 500 from some people. But the terms are already dictated by the lead investor. There is basically no negotiation by somebody who comes in and says, I would invest, but no, that's done. This is already, you can invest or you don't have to. It's simply a done deal. Now, the notes and the cup. You tend to follow the standard and the market data. If someone says, we'll look at the cup that's $15 million, and you are just a baby company that will be raised in Series C or Series A, they will just say you are unrealistic. You don't know really what the market terms are. If you say it's about 5 to 6, they will say, okay, you know exactly what you are doing, fine. You have to follow what's kind of benchmarked for your specific industry or vertical, and it has to follow what the investors are familiar with and what the market terms are. So again, these days, if you say my cap will be 6 million, that's fine. But I have clients who are, within 6 months, putting caps in nodes that start with 6, and within 6 months, they have 15. Because the first one led to so much interest that they raised, for example, 1.5, and now they have 6 million sitting in notes. Out of nowhere, they said, you know what, fine, we don't have to really deal with those things. We will close financing later. I have one space-related company that raised that much money within a very short period of time. But when we do Series A, it will be at least 20 million up. So again, it will be an outlier, right? But when I talk about median, you have big numbers, small number, big number, somehow you come to a place. Now, for the third question, what do you have to have? It really depends, again, on your technology. If your technology needs to be protected, and you say that you will be filing patent later when you started talking to others, you just are showing to the investors that you are not doing your homework, right? If you say, I don't have money for patent, then you have to find the money, protect yourself before you start talking about it. And then again, there are some technologies where you can have patents, but when you look at the competitive landscape, there will be 6, 7 companies doing similar things, and it will be an uphill battle to really win on the IP front. So you really have to go forward and just create a company that will be so fast, you raise your, not now 3, 4, 10, 12, move forward, really gain the market share, and then you will be winning using other features that you have, not just, oh, I have a strong IP and I can't move, because that just, again, I have clients who are raising for Series A numbers that are astonishing, but again, these numbers have to allow them to run extremely fast. And these are founders who have big companies and now got extremely good investments from people who also can help them jump to another level. So one final thought on this one. It's company specific and industry specific, and you will really have to show to whoever you are going to talk to what's the competitive landscape is, why you are going with the IP, for example, protocol as the first one, rather than run, and just prevent others from catching. You're welcome.
Hi, Stan. My name is Parmveer, CEO of LowTap. I have 2 questions for you. One, you spent a great deal talking about the stock option pool, and you showed how it affects dilution in the pre-Series A. What would be the median number of shares that's negotiated nowadays for the pool? My second question is, in your experience, have you found it common to issue a safe note to a friends and family round ranging from a few thousand to 50,000?
So let me just start with the last one again. This is just education, right? There is no safe note. There are notes as convertible notes or just promissory notes. And safe is an equity instrument. So if you have family members who want to give you $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, that's an absolutely great instrument from you as the company to give them. Perfect. Basically gives them the right to become a stockholder when the financing happens. You just define what that financing is. And in some cases, people will say there's a threshold of $700,000. In some cases, anytime you sell preferred stock, this converts. So if you have people interested in that, absolutely cheap and very good investment. Now, on the other side, the median, there is no reports on median for option pool, but based on what I see in most of my term sheets, and we deal with this on a post-closing basis, I would say probably if I look at all the deals, it would be something around 10, 11%. In most of mine, I see just straight 10%. There are some outliers where they say 15, some where you need to refresh the pool because now you see that all the numbers don't really make too much sense. The founders should get more, so you say, okay, we'll refresh the pool and refresh the founders with additional options that will give them enough incentives to be really happy and do the work. So you can use as your kind of ballpark number, benchmark, 10% on the post-closing, fully diluted cap basis. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Paul Boyle. I'm the CEO of a company called Earth Computing. So, lawyers are expensive. Most early stage companies don't have any money. If I was to go to, say, a Fenwick or another famous company in the area and say, what kind of deal can you do for me to delay losing my cash flow, what can I expect in the Valley?
It really depends on the company you are going to work with. There is probably 20, 30 different schemes that people are using in the Valley. Some require you to pay for almost everything that you do. Some will require you to pay for the IP-related things. Some will give you a deferral. It really depends on a specific situation that someone presents to your business partner now, being a lawyer or accountant or whoever else as the service provider, and laying out the facts and making the facts as promising as possible so you get the best deal. Because, again, this is free economy, and you can get any deal that you will try to negotiate when you leave home. You may get exactly the same deal when you go home and said, I achieved that, or you get 50% of it, or even something else. But nobody will just throw a number or a situation that this is exactly the set of terms. Nobody will do that without knowing who the other business partner is. But I welcome you to give me a call, and we will continue the subject.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Stan, for the great content. My question is about pre-money valuation and when it comes to negotiating a healthy term sheet for a long-term partnership with investors. When you are an early stage startup, but somehow you believe that you're ready for seed money, but you're not sure about your pre-money valuation, what would you focus more on? A rich board, meaning a board with credible people, IP, or traction?
The board will not help you too much, because the board will most likely at this stage be just the founders and people who are close to the family. The big names will show up on the advisory board that basically can be established as soon as the company is up and running and there is no investment. So they will bring credibility. But again, they will not bring high valuation, right? Because you can get them later. You can pay for services when someone will invest in your company. So what I would focus on, if you have technology that's going to be subject to patent protection, for example, or you have some extremely valuable trade secrets that, I'm not going to say Coca-Cola-like, but things that it is better in your company. Let's just say you are an AI company that there is no reason for you to file that patent, get that patent issued, and then everybody knows exactly what you are doing. You want to keep that as trade secret. So again, it's strategy, but when you disclose this to your investors and tell them exactly what it is, they will say, okay, no patents, great technology that nobody will know about for some time until you are really running and you are very advanced. And then traction, you have to show traction. If nothing happens for 12 months, then the question will be, what have you been doing? If you say, I was there, now I'm here, this is what I've done, this is my small 3-person team, excellent. And again, what I find with some of my AI, life sciences guys, they are, and I always mention this, there are some resources that will lead you to receive free money, non-dilutive grants. It will take time. Sometimes it takes other people who you have to hire, consultants who will provide some services that suddenly there will be some appropriation bill in your favor next year or something of that nature that will give you incredible amount of cash that now nobody will claim other than the people who are in the company, right? So again, company-specific stuff and facts. And then you have to really talk with someone who works with companies in similar industry, who can just use that knowledge and give you some hints, but then VCs will know your industry inside and out. They are, in my view, the best ones because they see so much. They will tell you whether you are dreaming because they already saw something like this 6 months ago and it's financed, but it's not public knowledge. So there is a lot of information, but not necessarily publicly available. And these are the people who know a lot.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I didn't see it in your slides, but can you explain to everybody what the price caps are for valuations and how that affects everything? I think that was pretty important. Thanks.
Yes. So years ago, people were putting into notes or another instruments what we call valuation caps or target capitalization. Cap stands for capitalization. That means that when the principal and interest that's accruing under the principal and under the convertible note gets converted into equity, you will take, in your case, the pre-money valuation that's in the note, let's say it's $6 million, and divide this by fully diluted cap, which with good lawyers, should exclude the notes, so the calculation is easier. And then you go to this other bucket and say, what are the investors paying for the shares? And it turns out that they are investing at 12 million pre. Now this leads, again, depending on the documents, to different issues, such as, so am I going to give all the people the same stock? That's definitely not the case, but it was done 10 years ago. People just didn't pay too much attention. What really happens, there are two options. One will lead to a situation where you will receive a different series of preferred stock. So let's say investor gets series A1, you get series A2, and there will be different prices because you are buying at different prices, right? That's one thing. Or another situation that will lead to you getting preferred as if you invested at the price the investor is paying, and the rest, using this other price, the delta will be given to you in common shares. And that's, again, something that has to be clearly described in the notes. These days, the good notes have it described perfectly. 2008, 9, 10, people just simply got to a point that the note said there is a valuation cap of 6 million, nothing else, and nothing about what happens. It basically said this principal and interest converts into equity issued to the investors at a price with the calculation of this cap, nothing else. So that led people to complications because then they had to modify the loans, and probably some of you have read about the equity overhang that now it's being addressed by, by good documentation, but not everybody is using good documentation again.
Hi, Stan. My name is Gabriel. I have two questions. One is around the right of first refusal. I can understand why the investor would want that in the terms, but what does this mean for the entrepreneur? Is this a good thing, a bad thing? Why would they care?
This is mostly a provision that allows the company to keep track of who the stockholders would be. Because you have, let's say, yourself wanting to dispose of 10% of the company. And it happens that the best deal that suddenly you got is from a competitor. Think about years ago, and many of you will say, oh yeah, I got it. Remember eBay and Craigslist?
eBay and?
Craigslist?
Craigslist?
Who remembers this? Okay, some of you do. So in that case, shares were disposed into the wrong hands, as it turned out later. So what happens, you want to sell 10%, the company says, I have the right to buy those shares on the terms that somebody is offering you. You say, okay, fine, no big deal. You sell to the company. At the end of the day, you ended up with the same economic situation. The company may say, I don't have money to pay you $1 million for your 10% because we simply don't have cash for those kind of things. Then the next level is the other investors will say, we can't really let this person to be a co-owner of the company. We have to come up with something. And some of them would just say, okay, we buy the shares, and the deal is again done. Or if for some reason they can't afford it, they will use the call say right that they have and just sell with you. They say, oh, maybe this is now the time to get out of here. Again, it's a mechanism that protects kind of inflow of people who are not necessarily the best ones for the company. If you want to sell to someone that the company believes will benefit the company, they say, no problem. Sell it, no big deal. Done deal, very easy transaction.
But it's for the benefit of the investors who came before. It's not really for your
It's
benefit.
for the benefit of the investors to have that right if they want to get more shares, because they have to pay the market price. If someone comes and says, I will pay you X, the investors cannot say, I will buy those shares and I will pay you X minus 50%. They have to pay you exactly that amount that's being offered to you. Sometimes those things, we assume all of them are credible, fair, and legitimate. They are transactions where people have different schemes where those transactions are completely fabricated. And someone shows up and says, I'm being offered. And then it tends, when people know exactly what's happening, they will say, okay, go and sell. And it happens that 2 months later, this person says, oh, something happened. The purchaser decided not to purchase the shares. And the cycle starts again.
And the second question is around that, the example you gave about the stock option pool and how the different sizes of the pools affect the post-money ownership. So I'm not sure I got the takeaway from that. Is the takeaway that you want to keep the stock options pool as small as possible? Is that
If founders,
shouldn't you just make it zero?
you will not be able to do that at zero. And I recommend that immediately upon formation, you at least put 10% of your equity into the pool. So you can immediately start paying people with options, right? You don't have cash, but you say, hey, I will hire you to develop a portion of my website. Boom, you have 10,000 shares. Buy them later, or if there's early exercise, sooner. The investors will definitely have their own metrics as to how much they want to see in your company on the post-money basis sitting in the pool. Now, if you put that at the lower level, what that means for you later, that you will be diluted less if there are fewer shares sitting there, right? Because now you have an additional investor who has maybe 20% in the company. So if you increase the pool by 2%, everybody gets diluted by 2%, not just you. Initially, if you go with a very high pool, you are the one losing so much. So again, I showed you this specifically on one slide so you can compare those two and see the difference, because sometimes you can't really see that if there are two detached slides. But this illustrates how those numbers matter, and the story about who cares, 500 more or less. Those things matter, because you saw already 6% at this stage. It's a lot of shares.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
When you're lucky and you get the term sheet, how much time is usually given for you to look whether you can get a better one or another one?
You should be trying to set up a certain period of time when you are actively marketing yourself and raising capital. It's not that you go to somebody today and plan to go to somebody 2 months from now. You really have to have a block. Like these 2 weeks, we have meetings with, let's just say, 7 or 8 good firms. Not 50, because that's unrealistic and just, I would say, not really intelligible at this stage. Few that you know invest in the space, who understand what you are doing, and then target them and try to have those discussions as closely as possible and close to one another. And then if those VCs like what they heard, very likely within a day or two you will have a term sheet. So if you had 6 meetings within a few days, those things should be landing on your desk, and you don't have to really turn around within 24 hours and respond. You can say, okay, we'll talk to our lawyer, and that will happen probably in 3-4 days. So if you get a term sheet, nobody will just say, if you don't respond by tomorrow, forget it. That doesn't happen. Because now they want to be your partner, not your master, right? So it's sometimes we see some gimmick going on that someone will be quiet for 3 days just to, let's say, show you that they don't really need it. But they say, oh God, if this person left, we are in the bushes. There are different tactics, but what you should be doing, trying to put your emphasis on having so many meetings very closely connected to one another. So when you get term sheets, they come at the same time. And then you pick and choose and negotiate knowing what you can get from this one versus the other investor.
Is it common to divide voting rights different from capital rights?
Again, you probably read what is kind of brewing for Snapchat, right? That's one thing. That's if you read more about just the recent few days, there are already plaintiffs' lawyers working on it. That's one thing. But at this stage, for a company, the only thing that you can really do with the voting, what I recommend to some of my founders, not too many, just let's say every X, is to play with multiple votes per share. But forget about having some people at this early stage with voting rights versus no voting rights. It's a matter of how much voting power you have, but the question of whether you have it doesn't exist. Everybody has voting rights. It's a matter of how many per share.
Hi, Stan. Good to see you again. And in your slide, you said not all the lawyers are the same. And I'm pretty sure there are a lot of details once you start pushing around term sheet by the time. So with that, for the people who's doing a startup, a very typical startup you've seen, what are the means to find a great lawyer and the lawyer that fits your needs?
Again, in most cases, it will be recommendation from someone who is already working with that lawyer, and that will be just like finding good dentist. If you live in Cupertino, you just moved there, you want a good dentist, you are not just going to open a phone book and go to the first one because you want to have good treatment and know that this person understands how to do certain things. So you go to a colleague who has a startup, 2-3 years old, and say, who's your lawyer? Oh, this is Stan. Okay. Can you connect me with Stan? And then Stan will say, yeah, let's have a call, let's chat about what you have. And it's a friendly, warm introduction from someone. It's a great relation. But it's just like with investors, and I talked briefly about this. Again, diligence. Everybody should be diligent. You can't just go somewhere and start building your company, having people you don't know, people with no history. You really have to spend some time and have team, not only internal team, but also on the outside, build using people who know what they are doing, who have good reputation and experience, because many people will claim that they are experienced and they did 2 deals, in the last 5 years, but they are great corporate lawyers, for example, right? Most of they do is Wilson Trust, for example, but if you tell them that you need a company and contracts, they will say, yeah, we can do this, no problem. So again, knowledge and market intelligence, as I call it from time to time. Welcome.
Sorry, I'm back again. And I understand this is not legal advice for educational purposes, but you were talking to a gentleman about stock option pool, issuing 10% on when you're founding, and issuing it to employees since you're not paying them. But aren't you risking your cap table if you're not doing a fair market valuation each time you're issuing stock to an employee you hire?
Now listen very carefully. Every single time, the board will grant options, whether they are to employees or consultants. The strike price or exercise price, and I will say this loudly, cannot be less than fair market value on the date of grant. That's why later on, when you have preferred stock, that's the moment when people start asking questions, why do we have this preferred stock? Because we need to protect the investors' rights with giving them privileges and preferences that are now priced at a higher level and keep the common stock, again, at the valuation that's still fair market value, but lower, so people come and say, oh, I got stock options at 1 cent, 2 cents, and I know that they just sold Series C at 27 cents per piece, for example, right? So 2 different classes, 2 different prices, but if someone ever comes to you and says, yeah, you can do whatever on the pricing for options, tell them that you learned somewhere that it has to be fair market value.
We have time for one last question. Please make it a good one.
All right, so as a case study, can you tell us how Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook was able to raise a lot of money and maintain control?
That's not that unusual when you look at a few other companies. It's a matter of having, again, you look at LinkedIn, look at Zynga, and this is what I mentioned briefly about some shares that have multiple votes per share. There are some companies that have 150 votes per share. There are some companies that have, I have one client, has 100,000 shares per, 100,000 votes per share. And the last time I checked was 600 million votes that this gentleman had. So it's a matter of having the economic rights, maybe giving you rights to 3% of the company, but on the voting side, you and your co-founder now have 60%. So again, it's looking at what your shares have as the voting rights, and that will allow you to say, okay, I control this company because I have the right to elect certain people. And sometimes you may have, for bigger companies, 0.5%, but you will be given the right to elect a director, for example, and you find multiple people and there might be 11-person board, where certain groups that may constitute just in the aggregate minority still have a large influence to elect people to the board. So again, it's all about voting power. If you want to start a company with 1 vote per share, it will be extremely difficult for people to add, as founders specifically, later provisions that give them more voting power. So if someone really wants to follow a good example of someone who has multiple votes, this has to happen on day 1. Now, the charter is amended multiple times. Every time there is a financing, the charter gets amended. It's a completely changed document. It's amended and restated. Sometimes there is 15th amended and restated charter, right? And again, it talks about everybody's rights. Every single class and series of stock has rights described in this document. So it's this kind of, I call it a constitution for the company, the most important document. You read that one first if someone says, so what do these investors have as their preferences? You start with that one and then go to other financing documents. You're welcome.
Let's give it up for Stan. So if you need the slides, email Stan directly, and the YouTube video will be available on our YouTube channel in a few weeks. Please take some pizza home. Thanks for coming. See you next time.